I think when you see the diversity of, say, birds, when you see hummingbirds and you see raptors and you see ostriches, seabirds, ducks, you wonder how that diversity came into being. Supposedly, there was a single ancestral bird-type species at one point in time, and over millennia, one species became two, and so this diversity sort of unfolded through evolutionary time. And understanding that at the level of genes and at the level of whole organisms, to me was fascinating and sort of set me off on a lifelong venture to try and make some contributions to our understanding of how this all occurs. In our efforts to map biodiversity around the world, we tend to focus on areas that we think of as hotspots. So these are areas that have proportionately more divergent species or more different species than areas elsewhere. And so there's a premium on trying to find where these hotspots are, and some of them crop up in places that we hadn't anticipated before. And it turns out that the Caucasus are one of these areas for at least forest birds, because our DNA studies are showing that a large number of populations of widespread European birds that are in the Caucasus are genetically distinct. And that's essentially the same as being different species. And therefore, if we're trying to conserve biodiversity, we now have to recognize that the Caucasus harbors much more genetic or evolutionary diversity than we thought from the prior knowledge of these birds. Sergei Dravetsky was one of the most outstanding field ornithologists in the world. He's got experience in many different places of the world, but he's especially cued in to what's going on in parts of the former Soviet Union and in southern Russia. And he became particularly fascinated with the biology of birds in the Caucasus. And once he began to realize that some of the birds were more distinct than we appreciated, he then realized that they were in greater peril because of the loss of forests due to sort of unregulated deforestation, the kinds of things that go on in those regions of the world that are perfectly understandable. And so Sergei is trying very hard to bring the science to the people and to the government agencies so that they will have a more prudent approach to harvesting or a more sustainable approach to harvesting the forest so that the unique birds of the Caucasus will continue to exist for the foreseeable future. We might think of science as doing a puzzle. And if your little cousin has come over and dropped half the pieces down the cold air return, and you try and put this puzzle together from only part of the pieces, you really can't see what the big picture is. But if you have all the pieces or understand all the pieces of the puzzle, then you can understand what the big picture is and understand why one area might be very important in terms of its biodiversity and why we should be concerned about preserving it. And so we decided to make that a special emphasis of this current study, in which we compared the DNA samples that we had from birds from the Caucasus with individuals of the same species from nearby Europe or the Balkans, say. And the goal was to find out, in a sample of 30 or more species, how many of them in the Caucasus were really genetically unique. Not always does the DNA and the external appearance, or in the case of birds, the plumage, match. And what we want is the best understanding that we can get of how many units of biodiversity there are. Well, we've assembled a sample of the different kinds of birds that Sergei Dravetsky and I are studying in this project, species that occur both in Europe and in the isolated forests of the Caucasus Mountains. Here, for example, is a bird called the great spotted woodpecker, not very different from our hairy woodpecker. There's a bird that his common name is just the jay, which is a pretty cool bird. It's got really nice bluish wings. So this is a scientific study skin, and ornithologists have been preparing these specimens for a couple hundred years, and I like to think of them as not just a rare book in a library, but the only copy of a rare book in a library, because this bird was collected in Russia in 2002 at a particular place, and you just can't go back in time and collect another specimen. So these scientific specimens are vital to anchoring our knowledge and understanding of the Earth's biota.